Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're having a look at another devblog for updates New Power in War Thunder, and this time it's time to have a look at the PTZ-89. This is a new tank destroyer that is coming to the game for the Chinese, and to be honest, it's looking like a pretty fun vehicle to play. I'm definitely somebody who is hyped for it, since it's always nice to see some new higher tier Chinese content. So the story behind this thing is pretty simple. So in the late 1970s, Chinese engineers began developing a new combat vehicle which would be capable of defeating some of the most commonly used second generation MBTs. These were mainly T-62s and T-72s and also other vehicles at the time. The basic design would be that of a turreted, lightly armored yet mobile tank destroyer, with the emphasis being around the gun. The development work on it, though, was slow and took itself into the first half of the 1980s for various reasons, one of them being lack of funding. But however, by the late 1980s, the project picked up pace again, and several prototypes and pre-production vehicles were built for testing and evaluation. And through this testing phase, the PTZ-89, as it became, was approved for production in early 1990, with small-scale production commencing with the first few vehicles reaching units in 1991. But with the end of the Cold War, however, the need for the vehicles, such as the PTZ-89, was not really there anymore. So this led to an early production stop in the late 1990s. So this thing's story did span quite a long period of time, even though it was never really used in a huge way, combat effectively. At the end of the day, that's the story of most combat units when it comes to history. So when we have a look at the PTZ-89, what are its general stats? Like, what are we looking at from this machine? Obviously, when we look at the armor is pretty weak. The strongest armor you'll have on this machine is 35mm, and that can be found on the turret. Everywhere else, it's a little bit lower than that. So if you're expecting to be able to stop any rounds with this thing, well, you're going to be wrong. It's pretty much as simple as that. One of the more worrying factors about this machine is a lot of the armor from top down is only around about 10mm. So that means that you can get penned by pretty much any gun from the air. And also remember the wonderful machines, the G91R3s, which share exactly the same BR as this thing, or at least did on the dev server at 8.7. That basically means that the PTZ-89 is going to be food for the AGMs, which are going to be raining upon it. Very sad time for it, but then again, there's a lot of other vehicles like this in the ground, which you can definitely make work. Stuff like the SU-100P, where you have like a really strong first 5 to 10 minutes of a game, and then planes start turning up, and then you die. So it's one of those machines that you're going to have a high, or at least try and have a high impact at the start of a match, and then see where you go from there because of the lack of armor. Now, even though it doesn't have a lot of armor, at least it is encased, so therefore you have to try a little bit to be able to take it out. The main part of this vehicle is the gun. The gun is a 120mm smoothbore cannon. It is also two-plane stabilized, so you'll be able to fire on the move, and you'll be able to peak shot pretty effectively in this machine. Another thing as well is this machine, at least on the dev server, got a stock Apf Sds Round. Now, the stock Apf Sds Round that this machine got will be good enough to be able to penetrate pretty much anything that it will fight, which is incredibly important. When it comes to tank destroyers, you don't want a tank destroyer which doesn't always pen what it shoots. I'm looking at you, Yak Tiger. So the fact that the gun itself has incredibly good penetration on it, has a really high muzzle velocity on it as well because of the gun, means that it should be easy to use. It also gets a HE donk shell as well for some reason, so if there is somebody who's hiding behind a hill, well, you can at least give it a go when it comes to the HE, and both of those, at least on the dev server, you got yourself stock. Now, another thing on top of the gun itself, the supporting structure around the gun, which I feel is very important, is the autoloader. This thing has a massive autoloader at the back of the turret, and what this means is that it has a 5-second reload on its 120mm. Most guns around the BR that you find it at have a reload of 6.7, 7.1, 7.8, maybe even going into the 8 seconds. So having a 5-second reload basically means that you yourself will be able to out-reload the majority of stuff that you fight, and so if they shoot and you shoot, you can always guarantee that you'll be able to get your secondary shot off first. This is incredibly important. If you've ever played something like the Type 90, for example, or the Leclerc, which is a high-tier vehicle like this one, you will understand the importance of being able to out-reload your opponent, because it means that you get that extra second to be able to line up a shot, especially if both of you have missed the initial shot, or it just gives you that extra second to be able to out-reload and therefore hit the enemy wherever you feel like. So the PTZ-89 should be very similar in that regard, mainly down to its autoloader in the back. The other thing, as you can see on top of this picture, is this machine gets a 12.7mm heavy machine gun. This is pretty much its only defense against air, so make sure to try and use it as well as you can. But it also gets some smoke launchers. It gets 8 smoke launchers. They fire off in groups of 4, so therefore you have 2 technical groups of them, so you can keep yourself alive a little bit there and also reposition, which is always important for tank destroyers like this. Once you get bogged down in an area and not able to go mobile, people will work out your range, and whenever you pop, they'll just shoot you. And if this thing hull breaks, then of course, no matter what they hit you with, you're going to die, unfortunately. Now, this thing, as I said, doesn't have a ton of armor, and that is an issue. But one of the great things about not having a lot of armor is it generally means that you also will have a decent amount of speed, because you'll be light. This thing weighs about 31 tons, and it does have a 520 horsepower engine, which means that it can go around 56 kilometers an hour. Now, this isn't actually that impressive. The acceleration that it has is a little bit better, coupled with the stabilizer means that you can fire on the move. But when you look at the other vehicles that are being added in, are very similar BRs, the Leopard 1A5 for example, and then also the Striker, this thing's mobility isn't exactly great. The mobility of the Leopard 1A5 should be better than this thing. The Strikers might be slightly worse, but that's because it's a big honker of a machine. But at the end of the day, when we look at the PTZ-89, the mobility should be good enough against a lot of the meta machines that you play. The problem with this machine, mainly, I would say, is at 8.7, it doesn't get access to thermals, and this means that spotting targets, compared to them spotting you, is going to be a bit of an issue. One of the things that you see heavily used around 8.7 is the 9.0 premiums, stuff such as the Leopard A1A1 L44, the AMX30 Super, the XM1 at 9.3, and then of course you have some of the other examples as well, the CV90-105 with its Gen 2 thermals at 9.0, which is absolutely ridiculous. So with the PTZ-89, you only get access to MVDs, so if you get up-tiered into a night battle, you're going to have a rough time. You're basically just going to have to sit at the back of the map, or just use, the other wonderful 8.7s that China does have, which do have thermals, so you could just use them, or you just kind of cry. So you're going to have to really train your eyes really well when it comes to PTZ-89. Make sure that you use those commander optics very efficiently compared to other machines that are around the place, and spotting is going to be incredibly important in this machine. But one of the reasons, or one of the main reasons I'm looking forward to it, even after all of the characteristics that I've talked about here, is if this thing comes in at 8.7, you've got to realize that China has a really strong 8.7. They have the M60, which has access to thermals and a really nice Apf Sds Round. You got the PTZ-89 which the only real struggle it has is its turret rotation and also its reverse. Everything else on it is pretty nice and also has access to thermals. The 8.7 for China is incredibly strong, and with this vehicle adding into it, plus the AA with HE-VT basically, the PTZ-89 can be incredibly strong in that lineup. Now, whether you know, we need to argue if that lineup needed to be bolstered or if they needed to look at other areas of the tree doesn't really matter. The fact that this is going to have a general interesting playstyle as a, you know, shoot and scoop basically, while you also have two medium tanks to back it up, should be really, really nice, and it's why I'm interested in the vehicle personally and looking forward to play it when the new update comes out. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Elove Goat, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez B. Young, and also Hans Fagellen, Sebastian Mizon, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.